Genesis 1 really reliable about origins? Of course, they don't think so for the most part. They also then ask, did God create man in his own image? And most do not think so. They think man is merely an evolved, intelligent animal, and that's all. And all of this is really under a much larger question. Does God exist? And of course, they say no, or I don't know. It might be amazing for you to learn that the question, does God exist, has answers that say yes from sources other than the Bible. From human reasoning alone, there are 5 logical arguments that say God exists. It would take 30 to 45 minutes each to present these arguments, and we cannot do that and respect your time. So if you're interested or just have questions, send me an email at the address shown, and I will reply. Now let's take a look at what science and the Bible say about the origin of the universe and life. Facts, facts, facts. So much data. How do we make sense of it all? Well, we do not want to do what the dog's owner in this chart is saying. Stop following everything you smell. In fact, it would be unreasonable to do that. We are to, like the dog pursuing whatever he smells, we must have good noses and be reasonable, thinking clearly about all facts so that we come to know all the truth and not just that which we choose to believe. It's unreasonable to refuse to think about all the facts. We should follow all facts wherever they lead. Do you have a good nose? Now, what we're going to do is make a side-by-side comparison of facts discovered by science and facts recorded in the Bible. Genesis was written about 3,500 years ago by Moses, a prophet of God. And the Bible tells us in Exodus 33:11 that the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. That's where Moses got what he wrote about the Genesis creation. He got it directly from God. And the first verse of Genesis 1 tells us, in the beginning, God bara, or created, the heavens and the earth. And the Hebrew word bara means to create something new that has never before existed. And since we are talking about the universe, that means God created the universe from nothing. Just as science now says. But before 1931, the predominant scientific view of the universe was that it was in a steady state. It was now eternal. It had no beginning. It may have had variations, but it was an eternal universe. Then a mathematician from Belgium by the name of Georges Lemaitre wrote a paper and published it that said the universe is now, has always been, and will continue to expand. This meant that the universe had a beginning. And this was something that most scientists could not deal with. They rejected it. Then in 1964, scientists discovered a cosmic background, microwave background radiation that's everywhere around us. And Lemaitre, in his paper, predicted that such would be found. And therefore, his theory was proven. And many other things that he predicted have since been discovered. So it wasn't until 1964 that science discovered facts, science facts, that confirm the biblical facts of Genesis, spoken and written 3,500 years before. And the obvious implication of a beginning universe is that it had a beginner. It requires an external cause, because a thing that does not exist cannot create itself. Now we're going to compare some things from this point forward. Science on the left in blue, Bible on the right in green. This starburst that you see right here represents the beginning of creation and the Big Bang, simultaneous equivalent events. Now, there are three constants that I want to look at. This all relates to what is called the fine-tuning of the universe, or the anthropological principle. And what that means is that scientists have discovered numerous facts, we're going to look at three, that show that it appears that Earth was designed for human habitation, because these three constants and a number of other factors have to be so precisely tuned for human life to exist. A slight variation of too large or too small, and we're not here. So the first is the gravitational constant. This is in the formula F equals G m1 times m2 over r squared, where r is the distance between two masses, and m1 and m2 are the masses, and G is the gravitational constant. So the force between two masses depends upon, among other things, this constant of G. If it's too large by an amount of 1 followed by 60 zeros, that fraction, then the universe collapses, because gravitational fields would be too strong to allow expansion. If it's too small, then the universe expands too rapidly and no stars could form. The cosmological constant. The precision required here is 1 part in 10 to the 120th. This constant called lambda. If it's too large, expansion is too rapid, and the gravitational force G cannot overcome the rapid expansion so as to form stars and galaxy. If lambda is too small, it expands too rapidly, and the G, even if G is right, it cannot cause stars to form. Another factor that's required is that mass and energy be evenly distributed throughout the space-time continuum. And the precision required here is truly astronomical, pun intended. It's 1 times 10 to the 10th, that's 10 billion. All of that raised to the 123rd power. And if mass and energy were not distributed evenly with that degree of precision, then galaxies would be so large that no life could form, because of the extremely strong gravitational forces that would not permit a life hospitable planet like Earth, or galaxies would be too small and not permit an Earth to exist. So it's fairly obvious, according to these constants, of why this is called the anthropological principle. Everything has to be just right for human life to exist. The combined precision, which is achieved by multiplying all these precision requirements together, is 1 times 10 to the 1,410. That's a lot of zeros following a 1. And the implication of this is to try to give you some sense of this impossibly big number. It's like having an Earth population of 10 billion. Our population is not that large yet. It's around 7, I believe. But having a population, an Earth population of 10 billion, and then having 10 times 1,368 power of those Earths, and then trying to find in all of that huge population of all those Earths, one specific cell. Now, I have had this question asked to me. Someone said, who was a scientist and an atheist with whom I was having a conversation, they said, well, all that's very interesting, but science has shown that God is unnecessary. All of this just happened. And it's just an accident that everything worked out for us. Because if it didn't, we wouldn't be here. So they said it would be more convincing if God had created instantaneously rather than progressively over billions of years. And my reply to that was, actually, no, it wouldn't. And the reason for that is, without evidence of a beginning and all of the development that scientists have been able to discover, they would still say the universe is eternal. If the universe just popped into existence, there's no indication of a beginning because there's no development. There's nothing that says it had a beginning. Then they would do what they did in 1931. And previously, they would say the universe is eternal. There would be no evidence to say anything else. Now, the real issue that we're going to start to tackle now is science speaks in terms of billions of years, and Genesis speaks in terms of 6 days. So, how can billions of years relate to 6 days? Well, the Hebrew word for day is yom, but it's got 5 possible meanings, categories of meanings in Hebrew. It can mean daytime as opposed to nighttime. It can mean a 24-hour day. It can mean an age or an era, that is, an indefinite period, as in the Day of Kings. And it can mean a time or a season, always or ever. It just depends on the context. Now, we have textual clues in Genesis that give us guidance here. A formula is used at the end of each of the 6 days of creation. And the formula is, and there was evening and there was morning at the nth day, where n is first, second, third, fourth, etc. The Hebrew literally means the beginning and the ending of each day. But this language is not used with the 7th day in Genesis 2:2 and 3, where it says, and on the 7th day, God rested from all his creation. He ceased. It says he had finished his creation, so he stopped. Why is there no formula for the beginning and ending of each day there if these are meant to be understood as 24-hour days? Well, the reason is fairly obvious. That day has not yet ended. God is still not creating. God has still finished creation. So this day, the 7th day, has an indefinite end. So the 7th day is an indefinite period. And that leads me to think that it's entirely possible to understand Genesis chapter 1 as an age or an era. That is, each one being billions or millions of years as appropriate to whatever the description God is giving in the creation account. Now, something we need to realize as we move forward. Someone has referred to the first 3 days as days of forming and the last 3 as days of filling. That's a fairly good way to think of it, but there's some bleed over between days 3 and 4. But consider forming as somebody building a house. It's about structure. It's getting the house ready for things to be brought in. And the bringing in of things is the filling. That's where the interior of a house is completed. The furniture is brought in and the family is moved in. So that's roughly those 3 days of forming and followed by 3 days of filling. Now, it's likely that Moses understood what he was writing to be 6 24-hour days, followed by a 7th day of rest. It's quite probable that's what he understood, because one of the purposes of Genesis is to reinforce what God gave to Moses in the 10 Commandments. And one of those commandments was to honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Israel was to work 6 days and rest on the 7th and worship God and do no work. And so the Genesis drama shows God creating for 6 days and resting on the 7th. So probably Moses understood that to be quite literal. But the very remarkable thing about the Genesis description is that the language also fits with facts unknown until the 20th century. So if we understand and admit this possibility that Genesis days are allusions to an age or an era, an indefinite period, we see that, yes, there is a possibility beyond just 6 24-hour days of creation. Now, another point about filling and the description we will be seeing of these days is that it is not a scientific chronology. It deals with environmental categories. It deals with nature in terms that ancient peoples would think of nature. So the land, which was most important, then the sky, the sea, the heavens, and then land again. It's not about strict chronological order, although there is a progressive order in the development. But the big thing is it's filling the environment in which man will live, with a primary focus on land. Now, we are going to use charts like this as we move forward in our comparison. What we will be doing is we will be reading Genesis 1 and then comparing what we read with major scientific discoveries as best we can. Now, in Genesis 1:1, it said, "In the beginning, God bara the heavens and the earth." And it goes on to describe the conditions, the initial conditions of earth after God created. And it says, darkness covered the surface of the waters, and the Spirit of God is hovering over the surface, which appears to be indication that something is about to happen. So the background in this text box is black because one of the initial conditions is darkness covers the surface of the deep. It covers the water. Now, these red arrows relate the statement, in the beginning, God bara, created the heavens and the earth from nothing. That relates to the Big Bang. As I said before, the Genesis 1:1, first part, and the scientific discovery of the Big Bang are equivalents. Our sun is known to have formed around 4.6 billion years ago, and ancient Earth formed around 4.5 billion years ago. So this account covers a time span of 9.2 billion years at least. And that's just the first part of day one. As we will see in the next episode, God allows light to reach the surface of the earth for the first time. And that is where we leave the day one creation event, life initially reaching the surface of the earth. We will deal with that in episode 5. Thank you for your attention.